I'd like to explain to you a little bit about what we do at the Center for Information and Bubble Studies at the University of Copenhagen. And this particular lecture is going to be much about misinformation and fake news and the attention economy. Because we've never had so much information that we do now. Just think of this. We have 400 hours of video to YouTube uploaded every minute, 200 trillion tweets a year, 5 billion pieces of information shared on Facebook on a daily basis. But just because we have more information doesn't necessarily mean that we become the wiser. As Joey Novick, who's an American comedian, recently said, the information in the world doubles every day. But what they don't tell us is that our wisdom is cut in half at the same time. That's a price to pay for the abundance of information. And if you look at information as if it was a market for information, then it's a pretty interesting kind of market because it's not really regulated. It's sort of a free market. You can say whatever you want, more or less. Of course, if you can't come out on Facebook because you break the community standards, in the end, you can start up your own server and broadcast all you want. So there's not really a regulated market for information. But just because the market is not regulated, it doesn't mean that the market for information is efficient in the sense that by the end of the day, when people exchange their opinions and their information, by the end of the day, it will only be such that the truthful information survives and the false one will actually get weeded out given the liquidity of the market by people exchanging their opinions and their ideas. Wrong. It doesn't quite work like that. There is actually a market for subprime information that will allocate a lot of the most valuable asset in the information age. So let's look at what is the asset of the information market. Back in 1971, I was 1 year old, Herbert Simon, who received the Nobel Prize in economics in 1978, he said back in 1971 prophetically about the information age to come. He said, and I read, "In an information-rich world, the wealth of information means the dearth of something else, a scarcity of whatever it is that information consumes. But what information consumes is rather obvious. It consumes the attention of its recipients." And there you have it. In information age, it's not microchips or oil, which is a new asset. It's attention. It is what's being grabbed by our attention. And what information consumes is attention. So there's a very delicate relationship between information on one hand and attention on the other. But in a market in which we have an abundance of information and we still only have 24 hours in a day, attention is a pretty weird sort of asset. Because when I talk to you, I'm not talking to anybody else. And if you are listening to me, I'm grabbing all your attention. That means it's a zero-sum game. Fear of missing out, FOMO, basically means that if you spend attention on me, you don't spend it on somebody else. So it's a zero-sum game when you use attention and you burn it all off. You can't distribute it equally. You can't save it for a rainy day. It cannot be put into a bank. It cannot be aggregated. And from that perspective, you can see that the more information you have, the greater the competition for allocating attention. And that is the nuts and bolts of the attention economy. And then think of one more thing. All of us who have a social media profile, we don't pay for our SoMe profile. But just because we don't pay in money doesn't mean that it's free. You do pay with your attention and you do pay with your data. And that attention and that data is being picked up, it's being curated, it's being packed, and then it's being sold to the ones that are really the payers, or really the ones who are paying for it on social media. And who are they? The advertisers. Which in the end will mean that the users are the products. We are the ones being sold, or rather, our attention and our data are being sold. So users are basically, in a certain sense, information-born prostitutes working for some really, really, really big pimps. They're called the tech giants, and they have some customers called the advertisers. So basically the idea is this, that the advertisers are the consumers, the users are the product, and the entire point is to get people to come back and play and play and play and engage and engage and engage, allocate attention, and tap the data. In the end, it's like Robert De Niro says in Casino, we take it all. So from that perspective, we should realize that attention as an asset is not like a monetary asset, and it doesn't distribute accordingly either. Now, there is a story out there that there is a democratizing effect by the web in and by itself. in a certain sense true, in a certain sense false. False in the sense that if it means that everybody can get heard to the same extent, that would mean that the attention allocation follows a normal distribution, the one on the left, then that would be true. The bulk of us can actually allocate the same amount of attention in others. But that's not the way it works. Attention does not follow a normal distribution when it comes to allocation. It follows a power law distribution, which means that some users have a lot more attention than others. And it's a massive power law distribution, insofar as to say that it weeds out, and it's a winner-takes-all model. Realize that 80 to 90% of all traffic is basically between 5 or 6 actors, and you know who they are. And then everybody else would come there once the big ones have big at the table. And once the big ones have gotten what they got, then they tend to get even bigger. So Facebook buys Instagram and WhatsApp, Google buys YouTube, Amazon.com buys, a few years ago, or Jeff Bezos bought a few years ago, Washington Post. Then it's not only books and spare parts for cars, it's potentially also political products being sold. So we should realize that in the information market, there are a few really, really big actors, microscopically in terms of users or followers, and macroscopically in terms of who has the traffic. And we should realize that this particular configuration of attention allocation actually leaves a market for some very subprime information products that we usually tend to call fake news. So just to sum up where we're at, in the information age, the prime asset is attention. Attention is not normal distributed, it's distributed according to power laws. And the information market is not efficient in the sense that only the good information will strive and the rest will get weeded out given the liquidity of the market. And then on top of that, users as products. So what we have there, we basically have happy hour for fake news. So let's discuss this fake news invasion that we have been seeing over the past years, but let's look at it from an information market perspective. Let's try to define what we mean by fake news first, because usually it's the words being used for information that you do not like. But what we do at the Center for Information Study and Bubble Studies is we are a lot of mathematicians, computer scientists, social psychologists, etc. And so we are interested in finding out what sort of information product fake news really is. So we generated this information quality scale. In the zone 1, you have the true statements. So there were so many people to watch the inauguration of a president, well, start counting. And if there were so many people as you claim, then that statement would be true. So those are the verified facts. Then you have in zone 2, you have the doctor's statements. Those are the ones that are either framed in a particular way, or you cherry pick the facts, or you doctor them in some other way. They're not quite not true, but they're only true from a certain perspective of given a certain frame. Then you have the undocumented statements. Those are the rumors that may be true, that may be false. And then you have the zone 3, where the poison starts, or where the toxic statement starts. So let's start with the lies. Now, a liar is an interesting person, right? Because in a certain sense, a liar is honest. Honest in the sense that a liar accepts that there is a distinction between true and false, because otherwise you can't define what a lie is. Then you may say something perpendicular to the truth for some reason or the other. Agenda setting, conniving, you name it. But just to say that a liar is honest insofar as to say that they accept that there is a difference between true and false. Now, in 2005, Harry Frankfurt, a philosopher from Princeton, wrote a book with the title On Bullshit. Excuse my French, but that's the name of the book. And what he does there is he tries to define what he means by what does a bullshitter do? Now, a bullshitter from this perspective is worse than a liar, because at least the liar is honest as to the distinction between true and false. However, the bullshitter does not accept that there is a distinction between true and false that you have to observe. So you can mix truth and falsity all you want because you're not obligated to that very distinction. And if you look at it from that perspective, and you look at what fake news is as an information product, it's either bullshit or lies, but it simulates journalism and thus truthfulness. And that means that it's a very, very toxic concept. It is so toxic that recently, World Economic Forum have been out saying that the global risk of massive digital misinformation sits at the center of a constellation of technological and geopolitical risks, ranging from terrorism to cyber attacks and the failure of global governance. read democracy problems. Basically what they're saying is that misinformation on the web and fake news is now to be understood as a global challenge on par with climate change, migration, health issues, you name it. That's where we're at. Basically because it's a threat to democracy. The Munich Security Report last year, or the year before last, had an interesting subtitle: Disinformation, fake it, leak it, spread it, to the same challenge. Well, the question is, what can you do about this from a scientific perspective? First of all, we should realize that certain social assets are a lot more contagious than others. There are certain sentiments that we have that tend to be very contagious. Jonah Berger is a marketing professor from the Wharton Institute, wrote a very interesting book called Contagious, where he actually is able to isolate what sort of emotions tend to get a lot of traffic online. And he comes up with the following examples, or the following trajectories of different sentiments: anger and indignation, fear, but also positive sentiments like fascination and awe, hope, sympathy. Now, the reason why anger and indignation and fear are very transmissible is that they are called activity mobilizing sentiments of a negative nature. So when I'm angry, I tend to want to do something. If I'm fearful, I tend to back off. It animates me to do something, to share, to click, to like, to upvote, etc. So if you write out on Facebook, "I am so happy today," chances are nobody really want to share that information. But if you write out something controversial, feeding into people's anger, their fear and indignation, chances are that they will share it, they will upvote, they will click, they will like, they will generate engagement, because anger, fear, and indignation are activity mobilizing sentiments. And you should realize that a lot of the fake news stories that's out in proliferation exactly feeds into people's fear, anger, and indignation. That's part of the business model. It's part of the subprime product. Get people angry, get people fearful, and they will share and engage. And in an attention economy, it's all about engagement. So in 2018, a very interesting paper came out in Science by Mogoshi, Roy, and Aral. And it's a really thought-provoking idea that they pitch and they verify. And it comes in the last 3 lines. It says, "Contrary to conventional wisdom, robots accelerated the spread of true and false news at the same rate, implying that false news spreads more than truth because humans, not robots, are more likely to spread it." And what does that entail? Well, it entails that there might be reason for spreading fake news, to invoke people's fear, their anger, their indignation, to troll, to disrupt, to do agenda setting, etc. And you can actually see another result that came out a couple of years ago when you were trying to isolate what sort of stories proliferated the American election 2016. And what researchers were able to show, Benkler, Ferris, Roberts, and Zuckerman, was that during the election, and if you started looking at Twitter handles and Facebook handles, you could sort of see that there was a closed ecosystem of news outlets that were actually able to speak pretty directly to the Trumpian base, yet with stories that were so noisy, so spectacular, so attention allocating, that the mainstream media could not resist to take him up. And the reason why is because, well, if CNN didn't take it up, MSNBC would. The Washington Post didn't, New York Times would, et cetera, and so far. And the consequence of that is exactly, of course, since it's a zero-sum game on attention allocation, if one doesn't take it up and I spend my attention on this, I don't spend my attention on something else. So I might as well just get the traffic myself. And what do you get out of that? Well, independently of whether you were for or against Trump, for or against Hillary Clinton's emails, you name it, what do you get out of it? You get agenda setting. It's what people are talking about. And that basically meant that the way in which you sucked all the oxygen out of the room and got all the attention was to play on the zero-sum game of the attention allocation. Now, if you can get people to polarize accordingly, you can get people to polarize also as to the truth, because whatever is true is not necessarily viral. Whatever is viral is not necessarily true. So as long as the narrative is strong enough, truth is the first victim in attention economics. and you can actually get people to believe the unbelievable. Here's an interesting statistics for you. Remember the two pictures pertaining to deciding how many people were watching the Trump inauguration. Now on your left here, you have Barack Obama's inauguration in 2009. On the right here, you have Donald Trump's inauguration in 17. Question, how many people were watching the inauguration of Donald Trump? Became a big issue, became the first big political case for Donald Trump. Now let's set that aside for a second, but let's look at the way in which Trumpian voters looked at just these two pictures in a polarized opinion market. Here's the statistics for you. Now, you can get 40% of Donald Trump's voters to say that the picture, which is Barack Obama's, is Donald Trump's. That's probably not too surprising after all. More surprising is that you can get 15% of Donald Trump voters to say that there are more people on the right than on the left. And in a polarized opinion markets playing in the attention economics, truth will be the first victim. So what we are studying at the Center for Information and Bubble Studies are basically attention allocation, opinion bubbles, the way in which our social psychology feeds into our beliefs because we look at what others are doing, the way fake news proliferates, the structure and the dynamics of the information market, and what sort of information products may actually strive and which ones will get weeded out. And if you want to read more about it, I suggest that you go to a book that you can download freely from the web. It's called Reality Lost. I wrote it with one of my PhD students, Mads Vestergaard. Reality Lost, Markets of Attention, Misinformation, and Manipulation. You can download it for free from Springer.com. Thank you.